The wind reached her before the town did. It came low across the plain, dragging dust and cold with it, slipping beneath her coat and pressing against her ribs as if testing how much fear she could hold before breaking. The stagecoach wheels screamed one last time, then stopped. Silence followed, thick, watchful, dangerous. For a single breath, no one moved. She stayed seated, fingers clenched around the worn leather strap of her small travel bag. Her knuckles were pale, her hands trembling not from the cold alone. She had crossed half a continent to reach this place, traded everything familiar for a promise written in ink and sealed by desperation. Now the promise waited outside, along with whatever judgment the land had prepared for her. The driver didn't look back at her when he jumped down. He already knew. They all did. He pulled her trunk from the roof and dropped it into the dirt with a dull thud that sounded far too final. Then he climbed back onto his seat and snapped the reins, eager to leave the moment behind. She was alone. When she finally stood, her boots met the ground slowly, as if the earth itself might reject her. The dust clung to her skirt immediately. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and something burned long ago. The town, if it deserved the name, was little more than a strip of buildings leaning against one another like drunks at dawn. Wood bleached by sun, windows clouded with age, doors that looked as though they had learned to stay shut. Eyes watched from everywhere and nowhere at once. She felt them before she saw them. Men lingering too long. A woman pausing mid-step. A child pulled back behind a post. The looks were not curious. They were measuring, weighing, deciding. She lifted her chin anyway. Her name was Eliza May Carter, though the world had rarely bothered to say it right. She was 23 years old and already older than she had ever planned to be. Her mother was buried in Georgia's soil, her father somewhere between a river and a lie. The war had taken what little certainty her life once held, and freedom, real freedom, had proven sharper than chains in its own way. The letter rested against her chest beneath her coat, folded thin from being read too many times. A careful hand, few words, honest maybe, lonely, certainly not a man in need of a wife. A woman in need of a future. That was how it began. She stepped forward, dragging her trunk behind her. Each sound echoed too loudly. Somewhere a door creaked. Somewhere else a laugh died unfinished. The wind pushed at her back now, urging her on as if even it didn't want her standing still. She reached the center of town and stopped. This was where she was supposed to meet him. She searched faces carefully, though she had no picture to guide her. Only details remembered from the letter: tall, quiet, a ranch west of town, a past he did not explain, a future he was willing to share. Her breath fogged faintly in the cooling air. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time felt unreliable here. Then she saw him. He wasn't watching her the way the others were. That was how she knew. He stood apart, near the hitching post, half turned away as if giving her space before she had asked for it. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but she could see the set of his shoulders, rigid, controlled, like a man used to holding himself together under pressure. He did not smile. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether approaching her would make things worse. The silence stretched again. Eliza swallowed. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. This was the moment she had crossed rivers and borders for. The moment every sleepless night had led toward. She felt suddenly small, too visible, too far from home. He finally lifted his head. Their eyes met, Whatever she had expected, pity, hunger, judgment, it wasn't there. What she saw instead unsettled her more. Something like restraint, something like caution, as though he, too, was standing at the edge of something dangerous. That he nodded once. Not polite, not cold, just honest. She returned the nod, her movements slow, deliberate. She would not shrink. She had promised herself that much. They stood there, bound by a contract neither of them had spoken aloud yet. While the town held its breath around them, a shout broke the moment. "Hey!" A man stepped out from the saloon doorway, bottle in hand, eyes bright with the kind of cruelty that liked an audience. Another followed him, then another. Eliza felt the shift immediately. The way the air tightened, the way the cowboy's posture changed without him even turning. The first man spat into the dirt. Didn't think they'd actually send one. Laughter rippled. Eliza's fingers curled into her coat, nails biting into her palms. She had known this would come. She had prepared for it in her mind, rehearsed stillness, rehearsed dignity. But preparation did not stop the heat that spread through her chest, the old familiar burn of being seen as less than human. The cowboy stepped forward at last. Not fast, not angry, just enough to place himself between her and the sound of the voices. His presence shifted the balance. "Move along," he said. His voice was low, worn smooth by years of dust and disappointment. It carried no threat. It didn't need one. That the men hesitated. One scoffed, but the laugh lacked conviction now. After a moment, they drifted away, interest fading as quickly as it had ignited. The town exhaled. Eliza realized she had been holding her breath. The cowboy turned to her then, really looked at her this time. Not as an idea, not as an arrangement, as a person standing in front of him, cold and tired and braver than she felt. "You made it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she replied. Her voice surprised her by not shaking. T reached for her trunk, then paused, glancing at her first, asking permission without words. When she nodded, he lifted it easily, slinging it over his shoulder. The walk out of town was quiet. They did not speak. They did not need to. The road stretched ahead, pale and unforgiving, disappearing into hills that looked no kinder than the town they left behind. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky the color of old wounds. Eliza walked beside him, matching his pace, refusing to be left behind or hurried forward. Each step carried weight. Each step was a choice. Behind them, the town faded into dust. Ahead, the unknown waited, and somewhere between fear and hope, her heart began to understand that survival here would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, slow, fragile, and earned one silent moment at a time. The wind followed them as they walked, whispering of storms yet to come. Night came down hard on the open land, without ceremony or kindness. The sky darkened in layers, bruised purple sinking into black, and the stars emerged sharp and distant, like witnesses who would not intervene. Eliza felt the cold deepen with every step, creeping up from the ground and settling into her bones. The road narrowed as it climbed, dust giving way to rock and scrub. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, a lonely, broken sound that lingered long after it faded. The cowboy walked ahead of her, steady and deliberate. He never rushed her, never slowed her down. He seemed to understand the exact distance she needed to feel safe without feeling abandoned. They reached the ranch just as the moon crested the hills. That wasn't much. A small house with a sagging porch, a barn leaning slightly east, fence posts worn smooth by time and weather. But there was something solid about it, too, something rooted. The land had been fought for and survived. So had the man who lived on it. He set her trunk down inside the doorway and lit a lantern. Warm light spread across the room, revealing rough-hewn walls, a table scarred by use, a single bed pushed against the far wall, and another narrow one set near the stove. Eliza stopped just inside the door. This was it. The place her life would either begin again or end quietly. "You can take the bed by the stove," he said after a moment, setting his hat down. "Warmer there." She nodded. "Thank you." Another silence settled in, heavier than the one in town. This one held questions, boundaries, fear that neither of them quite knew how to voice. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the loose boards, testing the strength of the walls. He reached for a pot and poured water, his movements practiced. "Storm's coming," he said. "Best we eat before it hits." They sat across from each other, steam curling up between them, carrying the simple smell of beans and bread. Eliza watched his hands as he ate, scarred, careful, steady. Hands that had held reins and tools and maybe worse things. Hands that had stepped between her and danger without being asked. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "Contract says you're free to leave after 3 days." Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I know," she said quietly, "but I didn't come all this way to run at the first sign of fear." He glanced up then, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or regret. The storm broke before midnight. Thunder rolled across the hills like distant artillery, shaking the walls. Rain came hard and fast, drumming against the roof, turning the ground outside into a dark, shifting river. Eliza lay awake, listening to the wind claw at the house, each gust sounding like a hand trying to force its way inside. She thought of her mother's voice, of nights spent praying for safety that never quite arrived. She thought of the faces in town, the laughter that had cut too close to memory. Her chest tightened, but a sudden crash from outside jolted her upright. The door banged open, rain spraying across the floor. The cowboy stood there, soaked, lantern swinging wildly in his grip. "The horses," he said. Fence came down. She was on her feet before fear could stop her. "I can help." He hesitated, then nodded. The storm swallowed them whole. Rain stung her face like needles. Mud sucked at her boots. The horses were frantic, eyes white, bodies slick with rain and panic. One had tangled itself in the broken fence, hooves thrashing dangerously. Eliza moved without thinking. She spoke softly, voice low and steady, words her mother had once used to calm frightened animals. The horse shuddered, breath slowing as she placed her hands against its neck, grounding it. The cowboy worked quickly, cutting away the wire, freeing the animal inch by careful inch. For a moment, lightning split the sky, illuminating them both, two figures bent against the storm, united by necessity and trust. When it was over, they stood there, soaked and shaking, rain plastering Eliza's hair to her face. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied. "This is my home now, too. Or it will be, if I'm allowed." He studied her in the flickering lantern light, rain dripping from his hat brim. Something shifted then, something subtle but real. Inside again, they dried off in silence. He offered her a blanket, then another, setting them around her shoulders with care, never crossing the invisible line between them. Later, when the storm finally began to fade, sleep claimed her at last. She dreamed of running, not away, but towards something she couldn't yet see. Morning brought smoke, not the gentle curl from a chimney, but thick and dark, rising from the hills to the west. They stood on the porch side by side, watching it climb into the sky. "That's trouble," he said WY midday. Arrived point 3 riders appeared at the edge of the property, horses lathered, faces hard. Eliza felt the familiar prickle along her spine, the instinct that had kept her alive through too many close calls. The lead rider dismounted slowly, eyes fixed on her. "Well now," he said, smiling without warmth. "Looks like you finally got what you paid for." The cowboy stepped forward. "You've got no business here." The man laughed. "We've got plenty. Heard you were hiding something valuable." Eliza's heart hammered. She didn't need to ask what they meant. She had been valuable before. Sold, traded, whispered about like property. Not again. The cowboy's hand hovered near his belt. "Not drawing. Not yet. She's under my protection." The words landed heavier than any threat. The men exchanged looks. One spat into the dirt. "Protection don't last long out here," the leader said. "Especially not for folks like her." The cowboy moved then, fast, decisive, placing himself squarely in front of Eliza, blocking her from view. "You'll leave," he said, "or you won't leave at all." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the riders backed away, hate smoldering in their eyes. They mounted up and rode off, dust trailing behind them like a promise. Eliza realized she was shaking. He turned to her. "I should have told you," he said, "about them, about the risk. You stood with me," she said. "That's what matters." That night, she found a folded paper tucked inside her trunk, a letter. Old, yellowed, her name written in careful script. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her mother's. The words were few, worn thin by time, but they carried weight heavier than gold. Truths about her past she had never been told. Warnings. Hope. A reminder that survival was not shameful, and that choosing to live was an act of defiance. Tears slid silently down her face. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of smoke and rain and something else entirely. Change. And Eliza knew, deep in her bones, that the hardest choice of her life was still ahead. The morning came too quiet and oh birds. No wind, just a stillness so complete it pressed against Eliza's ears until she noticed her own breathing again. She stood at the doorway, watching the land as if it might blink first. The hills were unchanged, the sky pale and empty, but something had shifted beneath it all. She could feel it, the way a storm announces itself before the clouds arrive. The cowboy was already awake. He sat at the table, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. Not rushed, not angry, prepared. His face was calm, but his eyes held the kind of focus that came from hard-earned experience. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Without looking up, Eliza nodded. She had known the same truth without needing to hear it spoken. Fear flickered through her chest, sharp and familiar, but didn't take root the way it once had. "Not anymore. I won't run," she said. His hands paused for just a moment. "I won't ask you to," he replied. "But if it comes to it, you go inside, no matter what you hear." She met his gaze. "I've been listening to fear my whole life. Today, I listened to something else. Something like pride crossed his face. Something like sorrow, too." The riders came at noon. Dust rose on the horizon, thick and deliberate. 4 of them this time, armed, confident, the kind of men who believed the world had been built for them and them alone. Eliza stood on the porch, the letter from her mother folded and tucked safely inside her coat. She could feel its weight against her heart, a reminder of who she was, of what she carried. The cowboy stepped forward, boots firm in the dirt, placing himself between her and the oncoming threat once again. The lead rider dismounted with a grin that never reached his eyes. "Told you we'd be back." "You were told to leave," the cowboy answered. "And you were told your place," the man shot back, his gaze sliding past him toward Eliza. "Both of you ignored good advice." The tension tightened like a drawn wire. Eliza felt her pulse in her throat. She thought of her mother's words, of nights spent believing survival meant silence, of all the time she had been expected to endure rather than choose. Not today. She stepped forward. The cowboy glanced back sharply. "Eliza, I know," she said softly. "But so do they." The riders laughed, but wavered when she met their eyes without flinching. She stood straight, shoulders squared, fear present but mastered. "You don't own me," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. "You never did." The lead rider sneered. "World don't work that way." "Then the world can learn," she replied. The first shot shattered the silence. Everything happened at once. Dust exploded. Horses screamed. The cowboy moved like lightning, dragging Eliza back just as a bullet tore through the porch post where she'd been standing. He fired back, sharp, controlled. One rider fell. Another scrambled for cover. Eliza crawled toward the doorway, heart pounding, ears ringing. She pressed herself against the wall, hands shaking but mind clear. She could hear shouting, gunfire, the thud of boots on earth, then a cry of pain. Her breath caught. She didn't think. She moved. She grabbed the rifle he had left by the door, hands remembering the weight from lessons she'd watched him give himself in quiet moments. She stepped out just as one of the riders rounded the corner of the barn, weapon raised. She fired. The recoil jolted her shoulder, the sound tearing through her chest. But the rider fell, stunned more than wounded, scrambling away in panic. Silence followed. Heavy, broken only by ragged breathing. The remaining men fled, fear finally outweighing cruelty. Their dust trail faded into the distance, swallowed by the land. Eliza dropped the rifle, her knees giving way beneath her. The cowboy reached her in 3 strides, catching her before she hit the ground. He held her there, both of them shaking, the aftermath settling slowly. "You shouldn't have," he began, then stopped. She looked up at him. "I chose to." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, once, deeply, as if accepting something he had been avoiding. They buried the fallen rider at the edge of the property, not out of mercy, but closure. The land took him without comment. It always did. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun sank low, painting the sky in fire and gold. Eliza's shoulder ached. The cowboy's arm was bandaged where a bullet had grazed him. Neither injury felt as heavy as what might have been lost. "You can still leave," he said quietly. "No one would blame you." She shook her head. "I've been running since I was a girl. This is the first place that asked me to stand." He looked at her then, not as a responsibility, not as a promise made on paper, but as a woman who had chosen her ground. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he said. "Neither do I," she replied. "But I know who I am." The wind moved gently through the grass. The ranch stood scarred but standing. So did they. Weeks passed. The land healed. Slowly. So did they. Eliza learned the rhythms of the ranch, the language of weather and soil, the quiet satisfaction of work that built rather than broke. The cowboy learned to speak a little more, to let silence be shared instead of endured. Some nights were hard. Memories didn't vanish. Fear didn't disappear. But it no longer ruled. Point one morning, Eliza planted something new near the porch. Not much, just seeds. A small act of faith pressed into the dirt. The cowboy watched her, then joined her, hands in the soil beside hers. Nothing was perfect. Nothing ever would be. But something had begun. And as the sun rose over the land they had chosen together, Eliza understood this truth with absolute clarity. Survival was not the end of her story. IT was the beginning. If this story reached you, if you've ever stood at the edge of fear and chosen to stay, leave a comment below. Your voice matters. Your survival matters. And remember this, even in the harshest places, courage can grow roots and bloom.